Hey, welcome to another bonus episode of the Living podcast, our little Unfundamentalist Bible study series. And this is going to wrap up this little bonus episode, little series I've been doing, because we are concluding the book of James today with sermon number 5. I got my little notes here. And it's out of chapter 5. And as you know, I've been reinterpreting the passage from James right out of the Greek into the modern day. And how I've been doing that is I have been kind of looking at the other interpretations of it. I've been looking at the Greek, using all the tools, and then employing kind of a Lectio Divina approach to reinterpreting what it would kind of sound like or look like if James were to write it today. So I'm not a Greek scholar. I'm not trying to make another interpretation of the Bible. But I am kind of having fun in a nerdy way. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about spiritual bypassing, which we'll get into what that is in a minute. But first I want to tell you a story. It's a story of a church that needed painting back in 1508. The Pope needed to have one of his chapels painted at the Vatican. So he asked this architect and poet if he was up for taking on a paint job, and the guy said no. He actually said yes later on, but then he's kind of looking at the architecture of this place, and he looked up and he said, "I am not in the right place. I am not a painter." So he did end up taking it on, and he did finish the job. And I think Michelangelo did a pretty good job on the Sistine Chapel. But he spent a lot of time on his back on a, what do you call those platforms you build and build and build? Yeah, my brain's kind of frozen on that one right now. But he laid on his back and arched his neck up and was painting, and paint's dripping on his face. And it took him a good 4 or 5 years to finish the chapel, and working on it like all the time. That was just what he did all the time, and just laid on his back and did all these beautiful things. I thought it was funny that Michelangelo was like, "I'm not a painter, man. I'm not supposed to be doing this," and then painted the Sistine Chapel. But Michelangelo it was really hard for him to do this. He had a lot of suffering and struggles through that. Physically, it was challenging and daunting. But he kind of stuck with it and pushed his way through it. And now we have a really beautiful piece of artwork that is one of the most famous iconic pieces, where God and Adam's fingers are kind of reaching out to each other. But he was able to take something that he was struggling with and causing him a lot of suffering. He was able to kind of engage with it and use it for transforming his hardships into something beautiful. And I kind of go back and forth, honestly, with messages like this, because Christians have a tendency to glorify suffering. That they're making you into a stronger person. There's a little bit of fame. I think there's a lot of like ego on the line, and fame hunger, that if I suffer enough and struggle enough for God, then I get some rewards on the other side. And you know, these people here in the book of James, they're all struggling. They're all having a hard time, and it's not an easy time to be alive. Especially if you're poor. So they didn't really glorify their sufferings like we do, because we have a very cushy society. We have lots of things that give us comforts and things. We still have challenges, but everyday existence for these folks was a challenge. So they weren't necessarily glorifying their sufferings as a way of like, God is using this to make you a stronger person, kind of a thing. They were instead, in this passage, it talks a lot about turning your sufferings into something beautiful. It was just about life. It was just about their living, how they had to live under the extreme cases of poverty in their existence. It was about making something beautiful with their life, which was suffering, challenge, and all this. So where we have lots of comforts and then things come in to disrupt our comfort, and then that is like the trial or the challenge or the suffering. Um, the people hearing the book of James, they all just kind of lived hard lives. And it was pretty normal, but it was about finding spiritual practices that helped you honestly engage with the reality of your life in a way that really, I guess, helped you and was benefit to you. So, because with suffering, let's just be honest, like it causes trauma, it messes with your nervous system. We don't need to glorify the suffering of human beings as, God's sending you through this because he knows you can handle it, or all that kind of stuff. Is just like, let's just throw that to the curb for now. Whatever suffering or challenges that you are facing, and we all face them, there's no need to glorify them, but there are ways that we can engage with the reality of our life in a way that helps us make something beautiful of it. That's what James is trying to do. Not glorify suffering for like some cause of your ego gets inflated and then you become famous and then you write all these books and have all these followers and then you're an amazing person and everyone looks up to you. That's usually like American style Christianity, glorifying suffering so that you become famous. This is not that. So this passage, the verse just opens up. I'll just read it. And it says, "Are any among you suffering?" I think we know the answer to this question because 90% of the people lived hand to mouth. They were very much under an oppressive landowner system. Lots of people didn't like own homes and land. They had to rent their bodies and physical labor out to more of the elitist landowners class in order to find bread and food and sustenance for the day. So it's almost like a rhetorical question. Hey, is anybody of you suffering? Because I think most of the people reading this would be like, yes, we are. Now, what's interesting here, the word suffering used is not the Greek term for like Christ's suffering. Christ, like it's commonly interpreted the passion, the passion of Christ. That comes from the Latin term, from the Greek word pascho, which is the sufferings of Christ. And we want like our sufferings to be like another passion, where there's vindication on the other side. Christ is resurrected and, all the things happen. There's lots of glory in it. There's lots of triumphalism in it. That's not the word that is used here. Are any of you suffering? They're not like, what's your passion? What's your, what's your cross you got to bear kind of a thing. That's not the language he's using. Then there's the word thelpsis, which is the Greek word for suffering injustice. And he doesn't use that one. Instead, he uses a term that is like, I don't know how to pronounce this one because with Greek, it's a dead language, so we don't really know how to pronounce it. My Greek teacher actually was a French missionary who spoke Greek with a French accent. So then that was like three kinds of weird. But this word, kakopatheo, is holding up under pressure. And I think we all kind of get that we call it adulting today. Like adulting is hard work. There's a lot of pressure placed upon you. And where do the pressures come from? But from most of the time, James says, from the rich elite class that is, owns most of the land and owns most of, in our day and age, owns most of the corporations and stuff like that. Kind of those rich elitist class are extracting their wealth out of the labors of the working class. Not much has changed if you kind of look at it, except we have nicer houses, I think. But it means to hold up under pressure. And so there's all of this weight. The economic reality it was a burden that was being carried by the bottom, 3/4 of society for the upper quarter of society. That's how it worked. That was a lot of pressure. And that was a lot of pressure. Are any of you under pressure? Are you holding up under pressure? And then he uses the term, then you should pray. And I really hate that, because whenever I like get kind of vulnerable with somebody and tell them that I'm having a hard time with something, or life is really difficult, or something, and then just look at me and is like, well, have you prayed about it? I just want to slap them upside the head. It's like, well, you didn't even hear anything that I said. You didn't have any ounce of compassion. You didn't see me. You didn't like validate that. Yeah, wow, that is hard. I'm sorry. When you just get that, well, did you pray about it, kind of a response, is it's like it's like they're trying to do something with their anxiety, because suffering does things to your theology. Like if you're having a really difficult day, a really difficult time, really difficult season, or a tragedy is hit, it messes with our American evangelical theology that says if we do all the things right, then we should get all the blessings. It's the American dream with a Christian spin on it. If you do all you can do anything you want to do, you can be anything you want to be, is the American dream. Like anybody can grow up and become the president of the United States, kind of a thing. And so when we put a Christian spin on that, it's like there shouldn't be suffering for people who are faithful. And so it causes a theological, like, um, a dissonance between what we think God should be doing for us and what we are experiencing in life. And when we're not suffering, we're almost like in a place of insulation from like crappy theology, because it holds up until you start suffering. And then you realize my theology doesn't work in this scenario, because I thought I wasn't supposed to be going through this. I thought God would protect me or save me or whatever. And it's like, well, did you pray about it? What did you pray about it? Is like that person is like, this is a theological problem. You're a fairly good person, and yet you're going through a hard time. I don't know what to do with that information, so I'm just going to bypass it. I'm going to go around the actual problem. I'm not going to address my own theology, and I'm just going to ask, hey, did you pray about it? And that's kind of like spiritual bypassing dismisses the actual reality of your experience with a spiritual cliche. It's like handing a Hallmark card to someone in the hospital, which is a nice thing to do, but it's not going to heal them and make them better. Like they need the medicine and the doctors and they got to do the hard work and take the pain meds and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, but James isn't doing that. James isn't just saying, well, why are you suffering? What, did you just like not pray or something? Like, what's wrong with you? He's not doing that. He knows that these people are having a really difficult, hard time. And he is asking the rhetorical question, are you suffering? Then you should pray. And it's not the kind of prayers that they pray were not like conversations with the invisible man in the sky kind of a thing. We're never really taught how do we pray? Like, how do you pray? Maybe I better do a solo episode on like different types of prayers. But the only way that I was really taught to pray as a teenager was, you put a chair in front of you that's empty, you imagine God's in it, and then you just talk to that chair, which I'm sure like that's a form of prayer, one form of prayer. But sometimes it just doesn't feel like it works. Like I prayed all the things and asked for all the help, and the things still happened, and it was really hard. And sometimes a lot of prayer is just looking backwards and then reinterpreting the past in the current theology that we hold. Have you ever noticed that? Like, something didn't work out the way that you thought it should or would. And so you don't want to like actually look at the theology that you hold. So then you just kind of say, well, it must have been the reason that this happened was that God knew in advance that, and then you start to justify the whole situation and reinterpret the past through the current theology that you hold. And sometimes that can be a helpful thing that helps you make sense of hard things, but oftentimes it ends up just being a form of spiritual bypassing where you don't actually look at the theology you hold and say, does this need to be rethought of in light of what's actually happening and what's actually real? Does this hold up to the life test? Does it actually, is it a good way that, does it enflesh Christ into the world in the ways that make sense, or is it just more of like turning Christ into a ghostly figure that is just really hard to make it fit into everyday life? So when he's asking them, did you pray about it? It's not just, hey, you should probably set that chair up and talk to the invisible person, and then maybe something would happen. But maybe the thing that didn't happen is because, maybe you're suffering because you just didn't pray hard enough or something. James isn't going down those roads. The way that they prayed, they had a specific way of praying that was almost monastic to it, where they would pray certain hours of the day, and they would have certain things that they would say at those hours of the day. One of the things that they said, these are Jewish Messianic Christians, so they would pray the Shema a few times a day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And the whole prayer, they would pray that like multiple times a day in almost like a monastic way. They had prayer, the hours that they would do. And what prayers are they praying? Well, they had some prayers like the Shema, but they have an entire prayer book that they would like have many of them memorized. That's called the Psalms. And so we open up the book of Psalms and we're like, oh, these are like, short little sentences all the way down. They're actually poetry and songs that were meant to be sung. And a lot of them are, like we have our Christmas songs we pull out at Christmas. Well, they had their Passover songs they'd pull out at Passover, and they would sing them as they're walking and making their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And they were the Psalms of Ascent, and they would climb the mountain when they finally got to the Temple Mount, and they would climb the mountain and they would sing these Psalms all the way up. And they were prayers. So it wasn't just merely about talking to an invisible person and hoping that you said the right words that made that person do something magical in your life. It was about an actual spiritual practice that engaged your emotion. Because I don't know if you've read the Psalms, but there's a lot of like sad Psalms in there, like the Lament Psalms. 44% of the Psalms have some form of lament in them. And a lament is basically, God, this ain't right. I don't know what you're up to. I don't know where you're at, but it sucks. Amen. That's a lament. Like 44% of the songs that they sang in their services and in their spiritual practice, 44% of their songs that they sang were lamenting songs because life was hard and they needed to process those emotions in a raw way. Now, think about all of the songs that we sing on a Sunday morning. How many of them get angry at God? How many of them accuse God of abandoning them? How many of them, like, I actually did the work for my doctoral degree back in 2015, and I compared the CCLI Top 100 songs sung in church with the Psalms, and Psalms had 44% of lament or a lament element in it, and our top CCLI songs had, I think it was 1%, because one song. It had one song, and it was Blessed Be the Name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. It was that song, and that song has a lament element in it, but it always ends on a resolved happy thing, because that's what we like. But they had ways of processing their actual situations and emotions and tragedies and traumas. And to pray was to pray the Psalms, the lament Psalms before God, or the deliverance Psalms. They had deliverance Psalms that they would, have memorized. God, deliver me from this evil, from my enemies, from my, and it was a deliverance from hardship that they would pray. And then they would have thanksgiving Psalms that they can also pray. That was like, these are ways that will get us through the hardships. And so did you pray was not just, did you say the right magic words to make God move and act and do something amazing in your life? Did you pray about it? It's like, you should pray about this, is more of like, dive into the Psalms, process what you're feeling, it was like their therapist. Process what you're feeling and what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, and like shout at God with it and yell at God with it and accuse God of abandoning you. And whatever you're feeling in that moment, to express to God. It was a way of not bypassing around it with, oh, did you pray about that? And just directly hitting your situation head on. So this was a call for honest spiritual practice to reflect upon your situation, and then the role that your faith and your community plays within that situation. Not just a plea for rescue that most of the time is just going to go unanswered. It's not like that. So that's amazing. Dang, man, we're like 20 minutes in. That's only the first verse. Are any among you suffering? You should pray. And then it goes on and says, are any cheerful? Then you should sing songs of praise. Now, the word cheerful there is actually an interesting, it's an interesting word. It's more like everybody is having a hard time, but sometimes it's not got you down. Sometimes you're like, yeah, I'm having a good day. I don't know if you've ever experienced like chronic health issues, but chronic health issues are chronic and they like just plague you all the time and all the time. But some days are good days, and some days you're like, oh, my brain's working, or I have energy, or I'm not depressed, or I have motivation. Some days you're like, it's there, I can do this. So are any of you cheerful is more of like in line of that. You're all having a hard time, but maybe you're having a good day today. Are you having a good day today? Then you shouldn't forget that there are other Psalms that are for when you're having a good day. It's like, um, there's psalms of gratitude and psalms of praise and psalms of celebration and psalms of trust. That it was like, if you're having a good day, don't forget that there are honest spiritual practices that will help you engage with what you're feeling now. Because spiritual practice isn't for just when, life feels bad. Spiritual practice is just for life. It's how you do life in like real time. And it's like you should, if you're any of you having a good day, if any of you are cheerful, then you should sing songs of praise. Now, they didn't bust out their guitar and like open up a music sheet. Like, we have done this thing where we've blended spiritual music with performing arts. And I don't know if you've ever like watched some mega churches put on show. It seems like there's more performing arts than there is spiritual music. But that's just me being kind of judgy. But it's what it feels like is a concert, and they have, like music. They have music directors and backstage directors and like in-ear monitors that tell them where to go and what to sing and what's next. And they like really make sure that the performance end is like spot on. And people go to those and they feel inspiration and uplifting. And I understand that because I went to see Hamilton and I experienced the same thing and it was amazing. But we've kind of blended this spiritual music with performing arts. And now we hear some things like, well, I can't sing. I don't do that. I can't sing. I'm not going to sing any songs of praise because I can't sing. And back then, like, they didn't listen to music. They didn't have recorded music. They couldn't just, they had to make the music like right there on the spot. So everybody sang and they just sang. And the songs that they sang were in the book of Psalms. And there were songs in there. So this, are you cheerful? Then you should sing about it, was a call to do honest spiritual practice when you're having a good day, even though life is really hard around you. And then there's a really interesting one that says, if are any of you sick, then you should call for the elders of the church and have them pray over you, anointing you with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise them up. Interesting passage here. And I have done some study on like healing prayers and like the whole Pentecostal healing tradition and all that. Had a whole class on it as a master's degree. It's really interesting. And we had this like project where we had to pray for 80 people for them to get better from some kind of a physical ailment they were experiencing. And we had to keep track and then go back and say, how are you feeling? Did it help? Did it get better? And then like bring our findings back. It was really interesting thing that I had to do back in 2012, way back in 2010. It was 14 years. Yeah, 14 years ago. So 14 years ago, I had to do this project. And I think on my end, I had like 5% of the people said, I'm feeling pretty good. Thanks for praying for me. Most other people said they weren't doing all that great still, and they didn't feel any difference. So I guess like 5% is not that bad. I mean, if you're in the 5%, you probably felt better. But there we get these like things in our heads of like Benny Hinn and spiritual, like let me hit you on the forehead and knock you over, and then God will miraculously heal you. And it almost sounds like that's what's happening here. But the word for sick there is to have an emotional or physical weakness or need. And it's kind of contrasted with other words for sick, like diseased or infirmed or harmed by evil or things like that, or bedridden or plagued by an epidemic. So it's kind of like a big term that says, are you experiencing emotional, physical weakness? Is there some kind of mental or physical thing that's like got you down? Could be a sickness, and it could be just not feeling like great mentally or emotionally. Are any of you weak? Then you should call for the elders of the church and have them pray over them, anointing them with oil. Now, the word here, elders, is the word for we get Presbyterian from, and it's kind of a hierarchy, like a bishop kind of a thing. Synagogue elders were like leaders of small communities, and they were kind of made up of the, I guess in the Jewish tradition, it would have been kind of the elder Jewish men. Now, most people didn't like the sorry, my brain stopped. That's chronic illness. Most people didn't live into their 50s. Like if you survived childhood, then you could probably make it to your mid 40s. But it was rare to have someone reach eldership. I think the life expectancy was 20 to 25 if you included infant and child mortality rates. But if you made it to childhood, the chances were you're going to make it to about 45. But there were some that went beyond that and became elders and seniors. And these are the people that have been around a while, and they kind of accumulate understanding and wisdom and knowledge. And this is a place where like they don't have hospitals and doctors that you just go to when you're sick. Like not like us where you call them up and you need an appointment because I'm not feeling good. Like, what are you going to do when you're sick in a whole culture that doesn't have hospitals and doctors for you, especially if you're poor? Well, you're going to go to like grandma's cupboard, right? And our medicine cabinet and see what kind of natural remedies are in there. So these elders would have like basic medical understanding of how do you clean a wound? How do you like treat a sickness? They had like basic medical care understanding. And one of the things that they could do is oil that was spiced with myrrh, cinnamon, or cassia had medicinal properties to it. So it wasn't necessarily like this big Benny Hinn spiritual thing. They're like the elders were the doctors. And if you were not feeling good, you can go to the doctors and they're going to pray for you, and then they're going to anoint you with oil, and there was healing elements in the oil and in the spices and the other essential oils that they would put in there, because most people just didn't have access to doctors and medical care. So they're like, we got to figure this out. The elders were the ones who like just knew how to do that kind of stuff. So there's a spiritual element of praying over the person, but then there is this physical element of treating them with the medicines that they did have. And it says that these people will be saved. They'll save the sick and raise them up. This is the word "save" there is like restored. So it's not an assumption that everything's going to work out and that this oil and this prayer is going to make you better, because life mortality rates were really low. But you would be lifted, resurrected at the end of all things. They believed in a physical resurrection, but also it will lift your spirits. It will heal your soul. You will feel cared for. You will feel seen. You will feel like, wow, I can't believe that it's important elder people are wrapping around me with love and care and all this. And it was an uplifting thing. It didn't mean that everyone who got prayed over was just like magically healed like that. It was more of like to be seen. And when you're sick in a culture that dismissed and despised you because you were sick, because it's like, oh, I wonder what they did to mess up and get sick. I wonder what sin they committed that God has brought this wrath down on their heads. To be seen and loved and cared for when you're sick in a culture that just despises you for being sick, like that was amazing. And you didn't even expect to see old age, especially free of any infirmities. That was just not normal. So you wanted a compassionate witness to see you, to love you, to care for you. And that was the job of the church. The church just came around and like loved the people that society discarded. That's what their job was. So my reinterpretation of this passage is there any among you facing hardship. Remember to pray the psalms that embody how you feel and what you desire. And if you're in good spirits, don't forget to do the same. Are there any among you who are weak, weary, or sick? Call up the leaders of the community to come and be with you and pray for you and treat your body and spirit with spiced oil. This type of focused and intentional care that we call prayer will redeem you and lift you up. I thought that was, this made a lot more sense in a modern understanding. So I guess that is, I'm going to save the rest of this for a little bit because we've already talked for a half hour. And I think that is good. I have other passages out of chapter 5 that we'll hit up next week. So thanks for hanging out with me for a half hour and talking about suffering and spiritual bypassing and all that jazz. We will see you next week for a James episode, the last one. So peace out.